Welcome to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast from WealthManagement.com focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. I'm Diana Britton, managing editor of WealthManagement.com, and in this podcast we explore some of the struggles and personal development issues facing advisors and financial services professionals, and how to get to a place of healing for mind, body, and spirit. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Healthy Advisor podcast, and thanks for joining us. As you may know, this is the podcast focused on financial advisor health and well-being, and today's guest has quite the story. Her name is Beth Bosworth. She's the head of financial planning and a wealth advisor with Perigon Financial Planning. Beth, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, this podcast episode may be a little bit different from the past ones I've done. I guess most of the time we're talking to people about mental health, road to fitness, or simply, personal issues they've been struggling with. And today we're going to talk to Beth about her experience during a natural disaster and her family's perseverance in the face of that. And, it's definitely relevant to this audience in terms of, just when something like that happens, it shakes up your life and, in unexpected ways. And so Beth's going to talk a little bit about that. So just a little bit of background. Hurricane Helene made landfall in the Big Bend area of the Florida Gulf Coast as a Category 4 storm late in the evening of September 26, 2024. Helene's largest impacts were across the southern Appalachians, where widespread, severe, and unprecedented flooding occurred with hundreds of fatalities and billions in property damage. Strong wind gusts damaged property and blew trees and power lines down in a swath from the Gulf Coast to the North Carolina mountains. Apparently, the deadliest Atlantic hurricane since 2017 and the deadliest to hit the mainland U.S. since 2005. Beth's town of Asheville, North Carolina, was hit on September 27th. The hurricane caused severe damage to the city, including fallen trees, destroyed power lines, flooded roads. Her neighborhood is still feeling the effects of that storm 5 months later. So Beth, take us back to the fall and what happened kind of leading in the days leading up to the hurricane, because I know that area had already gotten a lot of rainfall even before the hurricane hit.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people don't realize that we really started flooding on Wednesday. So as you noted, the 27th was that Friday morning when the hurricane arrived. But by Wednesday afternoon, after school activities were canceled, roads were being diverted where some roads were underwater, particularly in the Biltmore Village area around the Biltmore house. So we had somewhere between, depending on where you were, as little as 8 to over 20 inches of measurable rain in a matter of 3 to 4 days that week. So we were saturated. We had water coming up through the floor, the foundations of houses. Basements were flooding from basically underground. So we were really starting a response to flooding Wednesday afternoon, canceling school Thursday, Friday. And at that point, though, the hurricane, we were concerned. It was said to be fast moving. It was said to follow, or most likely to follow, a path that was going to send it west of Asheville. And so we were concerned about, of course, the winds and more rainfall. But I guess going to bed Thursday night, the expectation was, kind of stay to the west. We'd have a period that would hopefully be short-lived and also be kind of on the outskirts of the major wind force and the major rainfall that it was bringing.
Mm.
We did have some time to, the Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Lowe's, the grocery stores, water, the typical preparations were underway. Really starting Wednesday evening, I did my first emergency trip to the grocery store and we picked up diapers. We had so much water coming in that, here's tip number one for me, that diapers are actually very useful to absorb water quickly and easy to manage and throw away and backstock. If you can afford to grab a couple of boxes of diapers, they're pretty amazing when water's starting to come into your house. So all of that was underway, by the time we went to sleep on Thursday evening, and we were still seeing that course hold true, that we were going to avoid a direct hit at that point from the hurricane.
Mm. And then tell us about, the experience during the hurricane. How did it, impact your house and family?
Sure. We woke up about 2 a.m. was really when we started to have some awareness that some bad weather was here. The power went out about that time, and then that was followed by what must have been a really large branch falling onto our roof, which shook us enough to say we need to move downstairs in the basement. We actually have a generator too, so the power had kicked back in here. And we decided to bring the sound machine with us to see if the boys could get back to sleep. They're, 5 and 6 at the time. And so we settled some, at around 6:30, my wife woke me up and said we needed to get further into the house, into the utility room. And as I looked outside, I watched a massive pine tree fall across our driveway on top of both of our cars. I could tell it really smashed one of them. And to be honest, the branches actually brushed the house, the side we were on, including the window I was looking out. So we were kind of in real time watching it and running into this utility room. Probably tip number 2 to insert here is you really would be well suited to not use a sound machine when a weather event's going on, because you need to be able to hear what's happening outside. It's really important to have that audio awareness. And we were unknowingly masking some of that at the time. So now we're deep in the house, and we, because of the generator, we kind of snuck away for a moment, grabbed a small TV and brought it down there, and turned on the Weather Channel, and they were reporting from Asheville, which was surprising. And that was when we realized the hurricane had really come straight for us. So we really didn't know until then. It was kind of stuck sitting on top of us because of this other weather system that was still in place. It really stopped here. So we stayed in that utility room until about 11:30 a.m. So from about 2 in the morning to 11:30 a.m., this thing was just spinning on top of us with what felt like pretty sustained 60 mile an hour plus winds. The top readings were over 100, I think 106. But, we're getting texts and calls, and all these people are telling us like, oh my gosh, Asheville's getting hit so hard. Are you guys okay? And we're communicating back, like, we're watching some pretty massive trees fall down. We're deep in the house. We don't know. So about 11:30, we walk outside and we see all of our neighbors doing the same. And it's really one of those moments, I imagine, like when you emerge after a tornado, right? Everyone's kind of walking out at the same time. The clouds are parting, and they really were. The clouds were kind of parting. The rain had stopped. The winds continued even kind of beyond the rain. And everyone's looking around just in shock. I mean, we had hundreds of trees down, really, really huge trees. We later learned how grateful we were that was the extent of the damage. I live a little bit on the side of a mountain that happens to be facing the direction that took the most direct hit from these winds, these circulating winds that were coming at us. So we're all looking at each other. What do we do? And starting to say, well, we've got to start cutting these trees up. We have to be able to get out of the neighborhood. And then somebody said, hey, I don't have cell service. Do you? And, 5 or 6 of us standing there comparing cell carriers. And we realized all of our cell service is down. You never imagine, that it wouldn't come back up in a couple minutes. But after a few minutes, then 30 minutes, and we have no cell service, it sank in that we had lost connection to the outside world entirely, between no power, no internet, no cell service. And it was time to just go to work. So we went inside, put on some dirty clothes, got some power tools. Luckily, we have amazing parents and family members who stocked us up with power tools and also really taught us how to use them, including a wonderful chainsaw. And we started cutting up trees, kind of evaluated that we probably needed to try to cut the car loose that wasn't smashed. One was obviously not going anywhere. The other one was kind of pinned under more branches, maybe more superficial damage, and plotting a path into the neighbor's yard to even get it, because we had multiple trees down across the driveway, to get it out to the main road. But then once you reach the road, there's 20 more trees in the way. So neighbors are all kind of coming around, and we're trying to figure out the path of least resistance so that we can all work together to create some way out of the neighborhood. It turned out in our little area that getting our one car loose, and then kind of a nearly, we have a couple different ways we could leave. There was one that was obviously, we only had, I think, 3 trees to move. It was kind of critical to everyone to get our car loose so that we could get it out and allow people to get out. So, we worked on that. It took about 24 hours. We did sleep. I mean, we were exhausted, but by midday Saturday, we got that car loose and made our way out of the neighborhood. We'd heard that there were some FM radio updates that were starting, because that was, the only people could access an FM signal, a radio signal, if you could get in your car or listen. At 10 and 4 each day, they would do these FM updates. And so at 10 a.m. that morning, it was announced that there was Wi-Fi at the hospital, and that would be a place that if you could get there to go and catch a Wi-Fi signal. So we started down the main street. A drive that would take 10 minutes took about an hour and a half. and suddenly we're downtown Asheville. We're not to the hospital yet. We still have a ways to go, but we noticed about 60, 70 people standing next to the government building with cell phones out. And we jumped out of the car. My wife jumped out. I kind of parked the car. It didn't really matter. Yeah, you have to understand in these moments too, there are no parking laws, there's no meters. It's just kind of, do what you can. And we caught a signal. So, that was pretty crucial, because our family hadn't heard from us in 24 hours at this point. It's overwhelming to remember. We look around, we're able to FaceTime my mom, because again, it's not a cell signal. So you kind of had to have that, privileged ability to make a video call, and you just hear it happening constantly around you. Oh, thank God you're okay. I'm so relieved to hear from you. And then you start hearing, do you know what's really happened? Chimney Rock is gone. Marshall's too. Hot Springs is gone. Bat Cave is gone. Burnsville, like all of these, you start to hear what really happened, where we were in our world of, like somebody had just taken all the large trees and knocked them over. What we started to hear about, the just immense damage and utter devastation through all of Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. And, so then we got back to our neighborhood. We gave our car to the next person. They loaded it up with several different family members of different families. It's okay, this person from this household, this person, so that they could get down there and call their loved ones as well. And it started to shuttle people. And then we just kept chopping up trees, which we did for the next 5 days or so, every day, and did covered in sap and, trying to fix chainsaws. And, but that was really kind of how we spent our days. Water, we didn't have any water. That went away. So we had some bathtubs full of water we were using. We had a pool at our house. We were using that to flush toilets. Everyone was welcome to that. But it was just a matter of looking around our community, our little neighborhood, and resource sharing. Who has medication that needs to be refrigerated? It can come to our house. Who has gasoline? Oh, get it over here. You need some more water. Go take it out of our pool. Maybe we could get this person out of their driveway. They need to go check on their mom. So then we'd go over there with our chainsaws and start cutting up trees and hauling logs with 4-wheel drive vehicles and ropes and trying to get people access to whatever they needed in that moment that was critical or crucial.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the community really came together to help each other during that time. I found this essay that was written by a man, a resident of Asheville. His name is Richard Nilsson. He's a retired art and architecture critic. This is how he kind of described what was happening. The first week after the storm was hellacious. No power, no water, no phone, no Wi-Fi, no cable, no air conditioning, dark at 7 p.m. and no lights anywhere. The fridge and freezer sat silent. On the 4th day, we had to throw out all the food in both and scrub the interiors with bleach to kill the faint smell of mold. No water. We could not flush the toilets, and being unable to stop the physiology of the human body, we had to go somewhere. The commodes were becoming rank. This was a problem that everyone shared, and so by the second full day, neighbors had pulled together and set up a tent on a street corner where we could go to share stories, rumors, and advice. By the third day, they had food and bottled water to hand out to those who needed it. One neighbor had a swimming pool, and if you had a bucket, you could dip into the pool for water to flush your toilets. Maybe that was you he's talking about. Beth, across the street from us, Dorothy, a retiree like us, and her grown son, Anthony, brought us a bucket so we could go down the street and dip it into the pool. Because we are old and 5 gallons of water is heavy, Anthony carried the water himself. That afforded us 1 flush a day. By the 4th day, Anthony had found a children's wagon and was delivering flushing water around the neighborhood. It was still just once a day, though. Neighbors helped neighbors. Some went house to house to check on people. 2 fresh-faced young women knocked on our door. They had weak cell phone coverage and had received a text message from my granddaughter in New York, a former schoolmate, asking them to check on Grandpa. They sent a text back telling her that we were okay. The street corner tent set up a message board where people could ask for supplies or offer what they had to share. Our next door neighbor, who had just moved in, had no food, and we collected a few non-perishables and brought them over. Others came to us and gave us boxes of cereal, or in one case, an entire box of cellophane-wrapped brownies. It goes on and on about his experience, but that kind of just shows you a little bit about how neighbors came together to help each other in this community. But I know, at what point did you decide that you needed to evacuate the area?
It's such a tough question to answer because it was so hard to get information. But for us, we knew we were mobile. We had a car that could drive us out. We also started to hear that, there was a decent clearing for the most part to get us south, towards Greenville, because the other 3 major interstate arteries had washed away. So we had kind of one working exit to Asheville. And the city, without really directly asking, it was obvious that if you could evacuate, you were asked to do so. We had a really large amount of aid coming into the city, a lot of bodies to come and help. And we didn't have food, water, supplies, infrastructure to handle those incoming, who was already here, much less the incoming helpers. And they were just so immensely important, especially for search and rescue in those first couple of days. So, there was this awareness that if you could leave, you really needed to leave to avoid the strain on resources. But on day 5, my older son started to spike a fever. And we thought, gosh, maybe it's just going to go away. But then by day 6 in the morning, my other son woke up with a fever and we had no access to medical care. So the decision was made very quickly for us as well. Our plan was to evacuate. We're being asked to. We totally understand why. We're kind of trying to get everything together. We had finally gotten cell service too, so we could talk to the insurance company. What do we do with this car? Is there anything we need to do before we leave? Right. So you're kind of constantly scrambling, trying to figure out what to do, but we needed to get our sons down and get them checked out. Our biggest concern, honestly, was that we were under a boil water advisory. We still had running water in our house, but we didn't get the advisory because cell service was down already. And we've taught them to be independent. And if you want a water, you go fill up your water bottle. So we were worried that they had maybe drank some contaminated water, and we needed, so we left on day 6 with 2 sick boys in tow. And we knew the route, that we needed to take to get out of Atlanta. Our speedometer didn't work on our car, but we got it to Atlanta and we got them to the doctor as quick. We took them to an urgent care and they were fine. They just had a little viral something, but so it was really a combination of a lot of different things. But that was about the time that most of the people that we knew that could evacuate were heading out of town to try to, allow for what was happening, what needed to happen in the city, as well as to kind of maintain the resources and protect the resources for what needed to happen, versus those of us who would potentially choose to stay here.
Yeah. And I know you left for 5 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and you had a place to stay and everything, but you also, you have a book of business, you have clients. How did you manage your business, while all this was going on?
That's another great question. When I placed that first Wi-Fi call to my mom, I said, I need to tell you something like right now. Would you have a pen and paper? I said, I need you to email my compliance officer and tell them that we have no utilities. We have no access even to cell service here. So this was the Saturday. Said I need her to get that email, and they need to forward my emails, at least to try to manage communications while I was really blacked out. Right. And so that was the first thing that dawned on me. And then, beyond that, I just had to trust that things would come in via email, and, all my clients know where I live. And what I found was once I got reconnected, I just had it was overwhelming. I think I heard from every single client, and all they wanted to know was, are you okay? Are you okay? That was, and including inside of my firm. I had just everyone's reaching out, not knowing that we didn't have cell service. Another interesting fact, they didn't nationally publicize that we didn't have cell service. I kept wondering, why wouldn't you do that so that our loved ones know why they're not hearing from us, right? But it really was for our protection, because you're in a weakened state when a community is cut off from communicating if someone needed help. So that fact was kept really tight-lipped, that we weren't able to communicate. So I just needed to make sure that the person that needed to know knew, and then just trust that business continuity planning, and internal coverage would kick in. And it did. They got it with our IT service and forwarded my emails. So they were under monitor by 2 different people. And really at the end of the day, the only thing that happened was an incredible amount of people wanting to know if we were okay.
Yeah. I feel like that's such a foreign concept today, like not being able to communicate quickly and, on demand. We've got our cell phones, we've got, Wi-Fi, email, like all kinds of methods. And to not have any of that, it's, I think that just sounds, I think it's just foreign to us, right? And having to go and find an FM radio signal so that you can know what's going on. That's the state you were in. I guess I'm wondering, when you came back after 5 weeks, like what was the state of your home and the community, and what kind of work have you been doing to rebuild?
So when we came back after 5 weeks, that was because we finally had power at our house. When we left, we turned the generator off so as to not run it and again, waste resources. And, we had the deep scrubbing of the refrigerator and all of those typical things, but we finally got our power set back up, really done some damage when these trees fell and kind of ripped the lines from the house. We still didn't have potable water. So we did have some running water, but it was only to be used to flush toilets. And we thought, okay. And school had started. So school had started. They had started to dig wells at the schools, not knowing when water would be back, and kind of solving for getting kids back in school from a water perspective. They had brought in these really large tanker trucks and they're hard to describe, these cubes of water that were all around the city to provide water to restaurants, of course, to the hospital and other areas, and then schools as well. So that was really that 5-week mark when we came back. The debris is just everywhere. We had stacked and stacked and stacked debris just over the days that we were here and cleaning up and cutting up trees. And most of the roads had been cleared after 5 weeks, not all, but most. Some looked more like a dome where they had cut, kind of a round little tunnel through some trees, and that worked in some places. Power lines down everywhere still, but we just trusted that they weren't live. I never imagined we would drive over so many power lines in my life, but that became pretty normal. but we, still had constant repairs, and the city really had stepped in to prioritize really from the very beginning. We were able to get priority on one of our trees because there was a smashed car underneath it that was full of gas and live power lines around it. So, there was really this level of prioritization that was continuing, where things that were considered an emergency were prioritized, and they had all these different categories for things. So they're kind of working down their categories in terms of the cleanup. The other thing that I'll say has just become our new normal is the constant sounds of chainsaws. I mean, it's every day still here 5 months later. The community members, it was amazing to be back here with our people of Asheville. And it was almost an eerie feeling, a lot of hugs, a lot of tears. Everyone's very tired. Everyone's grieving. And I described it to someone. It was as though we had all been to the same funeral every single day. That was kind of how we start our days. But, you started to see the resilience building, and things like community events. And the River Arts District, they did a huge artist exposition. And then, they opened up Chimney Rock for a day, and I swear 200,000 people came down there. So we started to see these community events in some of the harder hit areas that people started to just feel so hopeful and so overwhelmed. And offerings coming into the city, whether it was, our kids coming home with Bombas socks. Shout out to Bombas. They do give away socks for anybody who wondered. Our kids came home with 5 pairs of Bombas socks, and they came home with these stuffed animals called battle pups that were given to every school or every child in the school system, all the way down to the pre-K, that just represent children who've been through something difficult. You felt this hope. You felt very much like you weren't in it alone, which was a strange thing about being evacuated, to be honest, that you had some guilt for leaving, but then also everyone's walking around acting like everything's normal, because it is normal for them, and, all these other places that people wound up in, but nothing was normal for us. We're like, why aren't you panicking? Why aren't you exhausted? Why aren't you stressed out? So it was very comforting also to come back and be with a community of people that were all, coming together in somewhat common experience. Those who suffered from flooding and land and mudslides is really just an absolutely horrific experience. And it's just kind of the worst of my opinion, of what happened around here. But, it was that sense of togetherness, communal value systems that made it all very comforting to be back here. And everyone still, you have an extra hour, or you don't have a meeting for an hour on your commute, you're driving through the River Arts District, you pull over, everyone had, masks. We needed that for toxicity reasons, commercial grade bags, trash bags, I call them grabbers, the little trash grabbers that you see around. My kids even had some, and everybody's just constantly out there doing what they can. And that was all you saw all day, every day. Utility people from Canada here constantly rebuilding the infrastructure. We had some utility folks from Sumter, South Carolina, that were in our neighborhood for, I don't know, probably 6 to 8 weeks straight from that point we got back. So they were here for over 3 months, hadn't seen their family, working every single day. They were assigned our area, and they were here working on it every single day. You lived in it constantly still. There's no escaping it. It's there all the time, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. But it all feels like you're not doing it alone, that everyone's doing it together. There's no talk about, political belief systems or all the things that bring us apart nowadays. That was all kind of gone, because everyone was just working together on common goals.
Wow. That's great to hear. I guess, Beth, I know this was a difficult time for you personally, right? And I mean, I know you're talking a lot about, really taking care of everyone, taking care of your family, making sure you have clean water and power, and, taking care of folks in the community. But what about you? I mean, how did you kind of come out of this emotionally, and what did the ordeal teach you, if anything, about like your own resiliency in tough times?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. And, I have to start by saying that I myself, my wife, even our little boys a little bit, but we have a great deal of respect for the mental health profession and have been believers in leaning into the support that that world can offer for a long time, for most of both of our adult lives. So we have mental health providers in place, thankfully, that we definitely leaned on through some of this to have some individual time to seek support in that area, I think was very crucial. We also, had a lot of family members, friends, colleagues offering places to stay that were really incredible. So we had a moment where we thought, you know what, we're not going back to school anytime soon. And we've been offered an incredible opportunity to go stay at a place in Hawaii. And we took it because we just thought we need to do something for us. We need to make some new memories with our boys. That when are we going to get this chance again? So we were trying to, I guess make lemonade out of lemons, although you were balancing this survivor's guilt, the guilt of leaving. And some of those things did make it difficult. The last thing I'll say is, I felt like serving clients and having opportunities to have review meetings or talk about their life events, really lean back into what I do for a living. It was a sense of normalcy that was a reprieve. So, I think managing schedule and trying to be intentional around that. And, it's like COVID, you had your kids under your care unexpectedly for an extended period. So it very much felt like that. I would say COVID prepared us for that to a certain degree. Yeah. But that, really working some through that time was actually something that was very soothing and helped ground me. So, that was really, I tried to really stay focused on, how I was doing, my general state, to then try to identify some needs, if possible, that needed to be met, because we have these two little boys too, who are just kind of looking at us, like asking us questions and wanting to know what the plan is. And we don't have one. Is our house okay? What are we going to do? and trying to make sure that, we were setting ourselves up to really show up for them and support them, because this was their new normal. I mean, they constantly talked about, trees falling, and that has continued for a while. Every piece of artwork that came home was about a thunderstorm or trees falling or flooding, things like that. And I think that's pretty normal, but they went through it with us. And I wanted to make sure that we were doing what we needed to do as adults to try to give our best back to them too. And you're never going to do it successfully. You got to have a lot of grace for yourself. You also have to make a lot of time for the administration that happens between utility companies and vendor communications, not to mention insurance communications. There's a whole lot of administration that happens after you go through something like this that in itself can be a full-time job. So just, knowing that you're doing the best you can, and you got to kind of divide and conquer and lean on people who offer to help, try to figure out ways to answer that question. When people say, how can I help? They mean it. Also, those people who come in and say, why don't I do that? Why don't I bring you dinner on this night? Or, somebody sent a care package knowing that we wouldn't have brought a bunch of stuffed animals for the kids and odds and ends, and it just showed up. So we had a lot of people who just almost like predicted our needs and were there to support us. And I give so much credit to them as well, just to helping us get through it and helping us stay, in a place of positivity and kind of keep the energy going to achieve what we needed to achieve each day. But it's not easy. You got to have grace for yourself. You have to have grace for, if you have a partner or spouse, you need to have a lot of grace for them. And it's really important to be able to try to speak up for yourself and your own needs too, which isn't always easy, especially when you're an advisor. You're built on reacting to others' needs and taking them on and solving the problems. We're wired to do that. And it's a really amazing thing, a really impactful thing that we do, that I think for some of us, it becomes a bit foreign to be on the receiving end of that. So, I think that holds true for a lot of financial advisors. I really do.
Yeah. I completely agree. It's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast, because it is focused on, the advisors and their own personal struggles. And I mean, Beth, you're just incredibly strong. I know you're still in it right now. And, I hope that, things continue to progress in terms of recovery there. I'm afraid we're just about out of time, but I'd like to thank my guest, Beth Bosworth, for being on the podcast and sharing her story with me. Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. I really enjoyed being here, and thank you for shining a spotlight on Asheville.
Yeah, and if you'd like to reach out to Beth, you can find her on LinkedIn, or you can reach her at Perigon's website, which is perigonwealth.com. If you have a struggle yourself and wish to share your experiences and help others in similar situations, please feel free to reach out to me at diana.britton@informa.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor. If you've not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This is Diana Britton reminding you that where there's healing, there is hope. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to The Healthy Advisor, a podcast focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of WealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your particular situation.